Okay, here's a weird one. And I was drawn to do this. I thought about this back whenever I was doing the history of medicines and stuff, and then talking about Egypt and different places that had had medicine, and also had done the one, well, I guess it's 2 years ago, Halloween now, about the same type of thing, and how that was witchcraft and things back in the day and stuff. And it's odd that most of things that we think of as medicines and poultices and helps in any way actually come out derivative out of that. So they kind of kept the stuff that was the witchcraft deal, and some of it was important, some of it had been all but lost. And we're going to look at a few different things. What drove me to this is just a guy was made a mention, and we were talking about uh, a tooth one that I had done, and in the process of talking about it, we he mentioned honey, and I said, well, honey means more than you think, and I could probably do just a video on that. To for it's a source of food, but before we had sugar cane and things like that, it actually was a super sugar, and no matter what we eat, it turns into sugar. So this was definitely something that was key pointed. And whenever the Bible talks about the land of milk and honey and stuff, there's a lot to that simple phrase. Milk, implies that we've already domesticated cattle, and we're utilizing their milk and no longer lactose intolerant, and helping to do things with milks and stuff. And cheeses come out of that. And what comes out of milk, man? What comes out of, other than the fact of having the cattle to eat too? So maybe just in a simple phrase, sometimes things are done differently. Well, I don't know if you were taught this way or not, but there's a lot of things that I found out later. There's different truths to it, and one of which was aspirin. And I don't know if you know that aspirin is actually gotten from the bark of the willow, I believe the white willow, but the willow tree, beautiful willow tree. It hangs down and stuff. And I don't know if you've ever had one, but we had one in our neighborhood. And whenever I was growing up, there was the Fleetwood Mac story song, and it talked about being a willow. I was with you last night in a dream. I was a willow bent over a fresh running stream, and da 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 and everything. And I was looking into this. My dad had a heart attack, and so they had to put some stents in him and things. And one thing that they put him on was this extremely low dose aspirin. It was like 88 milligrams, and they wanted him to take one, and it was going to also act as a replenish of a blood thinner. And so they weren't going to use as strong of a blood thinner on him because it already had those properties, and they'd been working on this and stuff. And I thought it was neat, so I looked into it. And of course, let me just preemptive to that. I was told in school, oh, it may have been second and third grade, fourth at the most, and we had a willow out there right in the courtyard of the schoolyard, big tree, and it would hang down to the point you could reach down. Most of the other trees were pine trees, and then there used to be pine needles like crazy, but we'd do pine cone turkeys and stuff and everything. But regardless of that, I was told that the American Indians were the ones that had, you know, brought aspirin to the world, and that we utilized that. And was even explained at one time that we may have known that, but witchcraft and but the Indians brought it back to us and stuff in America. And so I had that whole idea going on till high school and stuff. And of course, I'm starting to get deep into all the ancient stuff and everything. And it's funny what we're being taught versus what reality is. And you almost want to talk to the teacher about it. Quite frequently did, regardless of that, so we can get onto the subject. You come to find out that there were mentions of aspirins and people that had worked on it. And man, I forget the guy's name. I think they mention it in the little video clip right here. But in the ancient papyrus and medicines that they have deciphered out of the Egyptians. As I told you, there's a lot of them in a few places that they haven't even gone through the trouble of, mainly because they're all cracked up and are going to have to put it together and then do it and stuff. But hell, they do something. You've got these people that are doing this type stuff. This is slowly disintegrating. Maybe we ought to get on it in our lifetime. It would just make sense. But in the Ebers Papyrus found in Egypt at 1550 BC, as early as that, and there are other mentions to it, but it said on that papyrus in one portion, when a wound is inflamed, i.e., it starts to get infected, draw the heat out using leaves of the willow. And there are more statements that go along with it, but then that simple statement, they also understand inflammation and its properties that it's helping out with. And there are a lot of medicines in ancient Egypt we've talked about, and we talked about hemp being there before, and how Thoth's wife is actually the goddess of hemp and stuff, and knowledge, and blah blah blah. The anointing oil of the Bible and the people around there, and to be anointed, to be Christos. I'll have to do one on that, kind of in depth, and a separate one on that. But all of these medicines of old, and then it fades into mist, and then chemistry comes about, and then we have these things. We don't realize that a lot of them come from natural derivatives. And like pain, and talking about opium things, and the deal I did that one time recently, and how all these ancient castes and stuff in the Minoans have these opium shapes to it and stuff, and these are potion bottles. And what's a potion? It helps people out. They've made this stuff in there, and you don't want to slam the whole thing. It'll kill you in your heartbeat. It's so strong. You don't give people but a certain amount, and depending on what's going on, and stuff, and they use them to help versus pain and stuff. But that isn't just the be-all, end-all, although even in America, in the first parts of it, and all over Europe too, that was, a panacea, that thing that was seen as a cure-all, pretty much. Snake oil, it covers everything. Oddity about most of those snake oils you hear about, that was cannabis oil with other things and stuff into it, and they put in there, and alcohol, and da-da-da, and and hey, take a sip, and call me tomorrow. Coca-Cola had cocaine in it, just a small amount, but just give you a little zip. My granddad talked about it. He actually had some Cokes that were still sealed from way back when, that were hand-painted versions, and it said something about Atlanta Braves on it. I forget how much they were. They were $400, worth $400 a piece, and he only had like 4 of them. If he had a 6-pack, it would have been better. And he had the wood thing, but the wood thing was from much later than that. The wood thing was from like the late 30s, early 40s, and so it wasn't the original that went with it. And it was still worth a hell of a lot of money. And you could see sediment in the bottom of it, and there's no way in hell it was even drinkable or anything, but it still had cocaine in it. But that's neither here nor there, for it even goes back much, much earlier than 1550 BC. In fact, the earliest people, again, we start to find this thing coming into humanity at over 4,000 years ago. The ancient Sumerians made a surprising discovery too, and it's written down in there. But actually, what I'm telling you now is a Babylonian text, and what we would really refer to legally as Babylonian. It's called Sumerian today, but there is this ancient Sumerians, this modern secondary Sumerians, Akkadians, and then Babylonians and stuff, and the way that we're all actually taught kind of in that seems to be quite odd. And this actually doesn't go back to 2000 BC like this is indicating here. This goes back to before recorded time. That their earliest of little things that they had talked about is willows. And what you would do is basically scrape the bark off and make it into a water drink, and they noticed that pain disappeared. And he says, little did they know what they found at the time and everything, but it would, in a destiny, change the world. And yeah, it did. It created a lot of different medicines, and because of things like that, we have done a lot out of it. But aspirin was originally from this willow tree bark that you see right here. And it's a pretty tree, huh? And you see some depictions of that, especially in the Sumerians. In fact, the story of Anana and the Halupa tree, and how they would bend the tree over, and Dumuzi would reemerge from a tree, and December 25th, and all these things and stuff on a sacred grove. And we've talked about a lot of sacred trees, and there's reasons for those sacred trees. Some of them, like oak, and they have acorns, but people weren't really eating that and stuff. So why would it have it? Well, it's a reason of strength, and certain areas, of course, have certain ones, but other trees have properties with them that we've talked about with the yew tree, and of course all evergreen concepts in the cedars, like it talks about in sacred, the Bible, and the sacred Lebanese cedars and stuff that they also refer to in the Sumerians and stuff. And there used to be some great cedar forest all through there now, and it's part of the reason it's a desert, kind of a Dust Bowl, Oklahoma situation. But people were using this aspirin effect, and they had this fever of Shamash. And people have looked into that and realized that that's kind of a sunburn or a heat stroke or some type of effect. Shamash is the sun god. It's even the sun in the Bible, the name in ancient Hebrew, Shamash. So it shows you they have the connection word off of it. And also the god of, which one is it, the Amorites, and they had their god Shamash, and you're going to worship him. Whenever that girl apologizes for being tanned for working out in the fields, he says, "For the sun hath looked upon me," and that word is Shamash. So, or Sham, and you can hear Shams, and Shamson comes out of that. Samson in the story of sun, and these ancient sun worship, it all comes out of. But regardless of that, they knew that it would take away this heat in a different way. And it doesn't take too much knowledge to realize that, somebody can pull off a fever, and this helps it. And we know that to break a baby's fever, you can help with aspirin. Nowadays we have fancy Tylenol and things. They think, some people actually have an allergic reaction to it. And of course, any chemicals going in your body, and especially being a baby, it's just really very questionable at best. And small amounts can do a lot of things, but man, if a kid's hitting 102, 103, 104, what are you going to do? Anyhow, but they talk about it also have breaking a fever in Egypt and stuff too. And that's interesting that it seems like they already had the ancient idea long, long ago. And while it may have came out of Sumer shortly, you see it in Egypt, of course, as we talked about, and in Greece. And of course, through the ancient trade and things and helping people out, what's strange is that giving, like most givings that we're finding out later, are never spoken of, usually. But what is they have their own thing. Problem is that all these things are witchcraft, right? All these things are taking something natural and doing these brews, and it has to do with all these rituals and everything too. Nobody's just giving you a pill and I'll see you in the morning, but there literally is rituals involved with most every taking of drugs like this or anything else, and supposedly it helps a lot with the idea. Other times, whenever they know that they're not helping much, there's a superficial version where they do voodoo-y kind of things with an idea that now you're sick, I'm going to cast it on this animal here, then now we're going to kill the animal, and now you get better. Well, it was a 3-day sickness anyhow. They're going to just, and it's a way of harping on people too. But these early doctors, our earliest doctors were the barbers and stuff, and bleeding people of spirits, and all these concepts that had come out of ancient belief systems of certain people and certain ones that took over. But um, Aristotle remembered is recommended chewing willow bark for pain relief, and so even the ancient Greeks knew about it. Edward Stone in the mere 18th century realized that if you ate willow bark, yum, 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 that it would make fever go away. And they realized that inflammation and things would ease a lot from having done that. Now, this supposedly, and you could easily see why, there's somebody with a bad knee and he's given aspirin for some other reason, but it also makes his knee get better. And after hearing that a few times, they realize that it helps in certain things. Of course, you can go too far, and the reason it's getting a good prop to come back, and aspirin being used, like about the time of my father, because we were so modern, we don't need those archaic drugs anymore. We've created special new. Well, aspirin does something, and it's real natural. It's kind of like the stuff that comes out of pot that people are realizing does a lot of things, and the pain relievers that we have all come out of opiates, and there's no other way but them trying to mock that. They haven't come up with anything short of that. That's just variations on the theme. So, and aspirin in moderation and for different things for different amounts does stuff like thins your blood, and it keeps you from having platelets and so on. And they've noticed that people are on this effect and slight effect, not a bunch, don't have colon cancers and all kinds of things, to the point that it's markedly different. It's like, well, only a few people have ever gotten colon cancer that have been doing the aspirin thing versus the small percentage, but still a high amount that does it. Statistics like this get figured out, a long, long time ago, like what we usually talk about in the Sumerians and everything. Back then, somebody had to really, in their lifetime, figure something out, and whether it worked or not. But statistics like we get today can really show us things that we probably would have never knew. It's in a weird way, but it helps us accrue a whole lot of knowledge of 100 different shamans, 1,000 different shamans, and what people do with things. The only problem with this is it's become big industry, and the life scare of cancer and all those type of things, and big pharma, and it's turned into quite some business. That's the reason pot got dislegalized, if you will, a long time ago, but not so long ago. Just in the 1900s, it used to be legal totally, and they used to have heroin drinks and stuff for people that were sick, and all kinds of things the doctor, take in the morning and stuff. But they've tried to really be regulatory onto it, and it is one form of freedom we really don't have. So they found this plant also called meadowsweet that was up in Europe, and that also had an effect, but it didn't hurt your stomach as bad, but it wasn't as strong, and good for headaches and stuff like that too. And its name is spiridosis or something. So because it is acetyl version of aspirin, and even though it's come out of the willow bark one, because of the popular usage of it in spira plant, is where we get aspirin and aspirations, and an idea too then that it helps you breathe some. It was great for old people, and you can imagine it helps with circulation, with thinning the blood and stuff like that. So what could you do and stuff? And there were stories back that I find in some of my stuff where they had a chunk of willow bark and they would chew on it, and they'd stick it in their mouth. And what is this supposed to be? Or they have bad teeth and stuff? Maybe so, but it's also doing other things. What is this? It's always relegated to old people for some reason. Oh, okay. That kind of makes some sense, but man, you need to regulate that a little bit and figure out what really causes what and what's going on. And can you fix those teeth? We can do that now too. A lot of things have come up out of this, and there's even a story and an idea that how we found heroin was doing what we learned from aspirin. And I watched that little video, and there's another one like it too that's totally different, says a little different, but that's not true at all. We've known that plant also, just like hemp and this aspirin, since way before. And sometimes the history is given just like in reality, like I've shown you. It's a little bit different than people think. But yeah, something as simple as aspirin, you can find connections in ancient time. Yeah. Like, share, and subscribe, guys. Enjoy. Peace.